Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone. Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to grow your family. We're your hosts, Emily, Kate, and Alexis from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Marissa about her journey. Marissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we jump into your family building journey and also what you do as a professional in this space, we'd love for you to just introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa, and my pronouns are she, hers. I am a doula, which we'll get into in a bit. But as far as my background coming into this space, I had originally started off my career in global health and human rights. I was always really interested in maternal health, specifically in limited resource zones and in conflict zones. And I was really intrigued by the equity piece and what does that look like as far as people trying to build their families and then making smart decisions for themselves and how that decision-making process looks like across cultures. And then I had gone to Israel for my master's in public health. And while I was there, I had this great opportunity to work with a program that brought together Israeli and Palestinian midwives and doulas as a way to build practices, but also to build peace. And I loved it. I had done rape crisis counseling and family planning counseling and really enjoyed being able to be both a compassionate listening ear as people are trying to navigate important healthcare decisions and trying to figure out what information do they need to feel really confident about what they're choosing. And also how do they intentionally line up their support team. And then decided to come back home after finishing my master's in public health and worked in Boston area programs in their maternal and pediatric healthcare programs at hospitals. And then about 3 years ago, decided to leave my full-time job and become a full-time doula. And that was about 150 babies ago, and had my own babies in that process. And that's a little bit about me from a background professionally standpoint. I grew up between Marblehead and Essex in Massachusetts, and I now live with my family in Haverhill.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing all of that. What an interesting and diverse background and the road that has led you where you are now. So will you tell us about your own journey to build your family?
Sure. So I knew for many years that I had endometriosis. I knew that despite it taking a very long time to have it be officially diagnosed and recognized by my clinical team, as is common for most folks, I think that the current, average amount of time that it takes for somebody to be diagnosed with endometriosis is about 10 years. And it's not because the person who has it doesn't know what's going on or that there isn't, something that should be better or less painful or more manageable, but because of how frequently our pain and discomfort is dismissed, which I'm sure that I could spend all day talking about, but is probably not going to be short enough for today. And so I knew, I sort of anticipated that there were going to be some challenges. I didn't quite know what that was going to be. And I sort of thought that my issue was going to be getting pregnant. And it ended up being that my issue was staying pregnant. But so even before we started trying to conceive, I had already gotten into it, with my guard up a little bit, both because of the known endometriosis diagnosis and then also because I have a sexual trauma history. And so knowing that I needed to do a lot of work mentally and physically to prepare for what I was envisioning our family building experience to be like, and then also going through specifically birth and what that was going to mean for my body and for my mind and how they were hopefully going to work together, but I wasn't quite sure that they would. And then I had my IUD taken out. We waited a cycle to start trying. And then I got pregnant right away. And then we had an early miscarriage. And that loss was happening at the same time as the first birth that I was supporting as a doula. And then a few months later, I had my second miscarriage, also at a birth. And then after that, I explained to my husband, I was like, look, I know that the odds of having a third consecutive miscarriage were pretty unlikely, but in any other circumstance, if you are doing the same thing and expecting different results, you would say that that's an opportunity to try to do something different. And so I said to him that I really felt strongly about trying to get some testing done. And of course, the testing all came back looking fine. And then we got the glorious, unexplained infertility diagnosis. And then we went through that level of grieving and frustration and all the feels that go along with saying, we know something's wrong, but we can't quite figure out what it is, despite all the invasive testing that we just put you through. And then we got sort of a partial diagnosis of you might have PCOS, you might not. If you do, it might be insulin resistant, but we don't know. And then the reproductive endocrinologist decided to recommend going on metformin for a few months. And that was awful. I went to a very dark place mentally, just because of the physical side effects that went along with it, and the loss of freedom and control over my own body for sure. And feeling that sense of hopelessness, because of course you're supposed to be having timed sex while you're on metformin, but the interest while you are very, very sick is pretty low. So we didn't get pregnant during those cycles, and then decided to move forward with IVF. Our health insurance did not cover any part of IVF, either through diagnosis or through treatment. So processing that layer of stress on top of everything else and wondering, is this the right decision, was also stressful. And then we did move forward with IVF. We had a cycle that resulted in an unsuccessful transfer. And then we had a cycle that was canceled because of a thin uterine lining, and decided to convert to a prep cycle and to do a biopsy instead. And then on our next cycle, we made the very planned, intentional decision to transfer 2 embryos. Both of them stuck. And then we have our twins now, and they're 17 months.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that journey. And it shows, though, again, and I know we're going to talk about your career in a little bit, but how sometimes it's so amazing when your personal passion intertwines with your professional life, but sometimes it actually can amplify a sorrowful situation. We hear all the time of teachers and nurses like in a NICU that are also going through infertility, and it's like triggers then are everywhere. So I'm so sorry that your losses were happening at the same time as you were doing your loving care that you were providing for birthing people. So
thank you.
Appreciate you sharing.
Of course.
I know you well, and I didn't know the depth of your story. So thank you so much for that. But I wanted to piggyback on what Kate was saying and ask a question about how you dealt with that, how you navigated that time having a loss and then helping bring a life into the world. I can't, just want to get some insight into that.
Sure. Yeah, you do know me really well. I mean, you saw my pregnancy sticks before they were even dry. But yeah, I mean, it was really hard, and there's no way to, say that it wasn't. And I think that if I did say that it wasn't, then that would be, misrepresenting part of our experience. It was excruciating, both, physically going through the loss, and then also emotionally, and trying to separate out, how do I make sure that I come back to myself and care for myself when I clearly need to compartmentalize and make sure that I'm prioritizing the family that's right in front of me, that I've made this commitment to support through anything, and also not knowing what their story is going to look like. So I think, and I was just explaining this to somebody else recently, that I think because I was forced in that moment to prioritize somebody else, then I felt a stronger commitment to then care for my own needs at a different time. Whereas if I were just going through like a traditional 9-to-5, or wasn't in that set of circumstances, needing to, put the temporary brave face on, I think I would have just assumed that I was tending to my own needs instead of making a very deliberate plan to say, okay, I really need you to allow this other family to be the priority. Okay, now I feel comfortable. Now it seems like we're kind of in a lull between births happening. Now I have the ability, both logistically and emotionally, to just be whatever I needed to be and to grieve however I needed to grieve it. And I think that because my schedule is pretty flexible, unless it isn't, allowed me to have more time to be able to schedule more complementary services. So things like additional therapy sessions that I might not have had time to do before, or being able to do yoga in the park, or just being able to take a break and say, you know what, I am going to cancel all the meetings that I have for today. I have a lot of freedom and control over my schedule. And I think that that was helpful because I don't always know when those big feelings are going to come up. I think that a lot of us are used to preparing for the anticipated milestones or the anticipated triggers, like the anniversaries that should have been, or the due dates that should have been, or the holidays. But I think it's the unexpected things that kind of get you by surprise. And sometimes those feel like they're more painful to cope with. And so it was nice to be able to flex my own schedule for that. And I think also being able to see families, quote unquote, on the other side as much as anyone really can be, I think was also a motivating factor for me to be able to say, okay, like there really is a carrot. And I completely understand and recognize that not every family gets to that point. But for the most part, what I was seeing was that people do. And so I think in that way, it was actually quite healing and comforting to me.
Thank you so much. I love that you took that experience and took your own trauma, but translated it into help and helping others. And that's, obviously a big part of what we do, but thank you.
So I know you mentioned a couple of different ways, but kind of your deliberate attention to self-care and to finding those resources that would support you. Who were your biggest supports during this time? Was it people, or was it organizations? Was it yoga? Was it acupuncture? What brought you comfort and healing?
Yeah, great question. I would love to say that it was yoga. I'll be honest. I'm one of those people that gets really stressed out during yoga because I just feel like the silence is too much for me. And then I think about all the other things that I should be doing. And I know that's unhealthy and I'm a total hypocrite, but I feel like I have other good qualities that make up for it.
Well, we get along so well, Marissa.
I think that it was helpful to just have, some things on my calendar because I definitely am very task oriented. And despite the unpredictability of birth work, if I could live my life in a color coded spreadsheet, I totally would. And I say that quite often. And I think that it allows me that, again, like that accountability to say, okay, on Tuesday at 4:00, this is what we're doing because I need it. And I think that that was helpful. I think gardening was definitely helpful, especially planting memorial flowers for, the babies that should have been and the embryos that should have been. And I think another layer of support was eventually finding the right doula to support us as we were going through the rest of our infertility experience, and then having that continuity of care and support from her as we were going through our pregnancy and birth.
Thank you. And that's a lovely segue point. Can we talk a little bit more now about kind of the professional side of your world? Would love to learn a little bit more about what it is that you do and the role of an infertility or fertility doula, and how that can, be such a source of support and comfort and community when you're going through a challenge like this.
Sure. So I think that there are two terms that sound very similar, but in my eyes are a little bit different. So there are some folks who would refer to it as an infertility doula, which is what I would call it. And then there are some folks who would refer to it as fertility. And I think that there is a really important difference because in my mind, at least the thing that I associate with fertility is like sort of this preparation. And I'm thinking like woods and abundance and herbs. And while I think that that's all great, I think that when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of it as infertility because we already know that there is something going on there. And then as far as, to what degree people are going to be using, intervention or other services to help get them to building their family, those parts matter less as far as specifics, drilling down further from infertility. But I think I would consider it to be more of infertility doula work as far as what I do. So for me, that infertility doula piece is something that I started doing before going through infertility myself. I had noticed that I was starting to receive these inquiries, and I was able to guide people to a certain extent as far as, what to expect or, what questions to be asking that were similar to what we would prepare families to be going through as they were navigating pregnancy or postpartumhood. But I would also help them by organizing things like their protocol to make sure that they do have it all in one place, because oftentimes it sends you in 5 different portal messages, and then you have to consolidate. And then there's such a range as far as, well, if I start this medication then and then stop it this time, what does that look like as far as, getting to a date of, further action or intervention? And so I started doing that. And then I had also noticed that I was starting to get a decent number of birth inquiries for families that had already gone through some type of infertility or loss or both. And then certainly as I started going through it myself, I started formalizing the information that I was gathering from supporting others, and started putting together resources that I had found helpful, and also resources that other families that I was supporting had found useful. And so now what that service looks like is being able to offer families essentially a class on, what to expect through infertility, and then being able to provide that on-call text or phone call support to them as they're going through their appointments, as they're navigating hard decisions, as they're trying to figure out, how do I make this more comfortable from a physical and emotional standpoint? And how do I figure out what choices can I advocate for? Or what other things that I can opt out of? Are there other ways that I can achieve the result that my reproductive endocrinologist is recommending, or that I'm trying to get answered, without sacrificing maybe another part of myself from a physical or emotional standpoint? I know for me personally, my concern going through infertility was not so much, will I get to the other side, but how much of myself is going to be sacrificed by the time I get there? And will I recognize myself? And will I feel like that was a worthy sacrifice? Or will I feel like it was too much? And then that it's a life that I don't recognize or don't want to. And then being able to offer that as somebody is continuing through, especially the early weeks of pregnancy, because especially if somebody has had loss prior, their anxiety is much higher, and they need somebody who understands it. And I'm not saying that you have to have experienced that personally to understand it, but I think that it certainly helps to have that solidarity and camaraderie, and to have to explain one less component to somebody. And to also anticipate, these were the things that were helpful for others. Maybe it's helpful for you, maybe it isn't, and you leave that there, and that's okay too. But being able to present somebody with options on how they manage those first few weeks when they're trying to feel joy, feel relief, but also are grieving and also are pretty scared. And especially again, through that handoff after they've graduated from their reproductive endocrinologist clinic, before they get released into like Gen Pop pregnancy, knowing that there may be a month or more in between clinic visits. And that's also still during that time where if something is going to happen, like a miscarriage, it's likely to happen during that time. But also, especially going through IVF, even just the prevalence of, subchorionic hematomas and how traumatic that can be for somebody if they're not knowing that that's a possibility or what to expect, the doula can provide support then. And then also helping them figure out, where do they want to start their prenatal care? Because just because you went to a clinic that offers prenatal services doesn't mean that you have to stay there. You can, but you should know that you have options. And also giving that permission to them that they're not going to jinx that current pregnancy because they're changing. And so often we see that, especially when somebody has gone through infertility through a hospital-based clinic.
Yeah. Well, there was so much richness to everything you just said. And I personally just want to create the time machine that sends me back and is able to have a fertility doula, an infertility doula, ideally you, but you would have been too young. But sounds so wonderful and such a gift to be able to provide all of that for someone's and for multiple people. So thank you. And so, what are some of your favorite resources that you share with the people that you're working with that are struggling to grow their families?
Well, obviously all that. And then also,
That was not a leading question, I swear.
it's okay. It's, it still would have been my answer. And then also the support group that Alexis and other women have founded. I think that, what is the actual name of it? There's two.
IVF support group Massachusetts, and then the pregnancy group, the sister group.
And those are both on Facebook.
Yeah, I think that those are really helpful because they were resources that are available like essentially at any time, right? So, even with an infertility doula, we still sleep, at least we're hoping to. And so it's nice, especially because everything is scarier at night. So to be able to go and, scroll through or to post a question. On the flip side, sometimes it is also helpful to then have the infertility doula who can help reel you back in and help remind you that just because you saw it somewhere, that doesn't mean that it's going to be your story. It just means that it's, maybe a story that you share common threads with, or maybe it's just a story that you scrolled by. So I think that those were really helpful. And then I think also just the framework of thinking about, in the same way that there's so much focus around building out birth preferences or a birth plan and thinking about comfort measures in birth. Why aren't we thinking about that as we're going through infertility as well? And I think in that way, doulas have a lot of training around providing the informational support, the emotional support, the physical support for pregnancy and birth. And I think that that's very much relatable to infertility. So examples would be like, I know that I advocated to, self-guide Wanda for the transvaginal exams because that was what was helpful for me. I appreciated Brandy Carlisle walking me through every single, monitoring appointment and the car ride home from every visit. And she was just there for me, So it was great to just have a musical component, to have a podcast or a playlist that I could dive into and to zone out with while I was having something that was really uncomfortable for me, and to distract my mind, but in a way that wasn't disassociating from my body either. And I think another layer was also just even having, like, I have these spiky massage balls that I'm pretty sure are either pet toys or dryer balls. I can't remember which section I grabbed them from, but they're a fan favorite from birth support. But I found that really helpful, especially, with all of like the needles and injections and all that, both at home and also in the office. And I've made those same recommendations to other families that I've supported as they're going through it as well. And then having aromatherapy instead of having, the smell of like an alcohol wipe that's prepping your spot, having something like eucalyptus or oranges, in the same way that we don't want to have a clinical smell for our birth space. I think just reminding people that they do have choices. And I think going back to your earlier question of, talking about how hard it is, going through birth work when you're trying to build your own family, I think part of that was also seeing how important language is, seeing how important choices are, and trauma-informed care. And I am not at all saying that everyone who has gone through infertility would refer to their experience as traumatic, but I think a whole heck of a lot of people would. And so I think especially when clinical teams certainly know that it was an IVF pregnancy or that they went through some type of infertility, because then they comment on it about like why you should be induced at a certain time or what that means. Well, then you should also be mindful of that part of their history when talking to them about, other choices, and like, how do you want this loss to be referred to during your birth, or how do you want to be referred to in postpartum when you're being asked how many kids do you have, or if the number of pregnancies and number of children don't match up, or if somebody knows that you use donor eggs, embryos, or sperm, if you know that enough to make it into like a spectacle, then you know that you could have actually made choices that either acknowledged it for what it was and then just casually move on, or just not even bring it up because at that point during birth, it doesn't matter anymore. So just reminding people that they can advocate for the environment that feels right for them as far as the communication and the support from the clinical team.
My goal in life is to be as enlightened as Marissa. Like even the alcohol wipes, things you don't think of that could send your anxiety into a spiral. It's mind blowing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, even something like, when somebody is often getting like retested for an epidural. So during birth, if somebody had an epidural placed and then it doesn't seem like it's working quite effectively, then oftentimes the anesthesiologist will come in and do a test. And so typically what they do as a test is they'll use the corner of an alcohol pad and they'll poke the birthing person in multiple spots to compare the poke to see where the sensation is. And while I appreciate that that's a relatively less invasive practice than like using clamps or something. If somebody has already had like multiple years worth of using alcohol wipes, like just knowing that even something as small as that could be a trigger. And also just even the way that we casually make small talk with people, right? As far as like, oh, how many kids do you have? Or, oh, are you planning on another? Or especially in the clinical spaces, like I had to go to the hospital to have non-stress tests done for my pregnancy with the twins because my clinic couldn't accommodate that outpatient. And every single time I would be asked, oh, are these your first? You must be so excited. And I am excited, and these are going to be my first living children, but I really don't want to have this conversation every time. So eventually I became, sort of conditioned to get anxious before going in, which is also not ideal. And I kept telling people every single time, please stop asking me this. Please write it somewhere, or please just look at my chart before you make small talk. Also, reproductive plans or circumstances should never be small talk. But if it is, then do better. And that was something that was central to our birth plan on the day that we went in for our planned C-section. I told my birth doula and my husband, this is the thing that I really do not want to be asked on this day. And I was pissed and also proud that I needed to advocate that hard, but at least it didn't happen that day. But I shouldn't have had those concerns going in on the day that I'm meeting my kids that I work so hard for.
Agreed. Small talk should be the weather and like the Red Sox or something, like why do we go there?
Exactly.
People think that's small talk and it's really not. Although you might meet the wrong Red Sox fan and it would be intense too. But yeah, but I'm so glad you advocated for yourself and what you wanted to hear and experience and what you didn't want to hear. But then you have to get people to listen and to read the notes sometimes. So one thing we've been trying to ask everyone we're talking to, sort of they're like two sides of the same coin. One is what is one thing you want to say to someone who's just starting out trying to grow their family? And then what is one thing you hate for people to hear when they're trying to grow their families and which you want to what do you get rid of? Get rid of that statement forever.
So I feel like I have a follow-up question. And do you feel like in your experience of doing these that people have a gut reaction to I really want to, like, I can't wait to get out my answer to the first part of the question, or I can't wait to get out my answer to the second part of the question?
It's true. I think you're right. I think the second. I think we have a more immediate reaction to the don't say this ever again.
Yep.
Yeah. So which one did you have the stronger reaction to?
Oh, for sure the second, but I'll start with the positives. But I think that's the thing that I would tell somebody is that, you have options, you have choices. You don't have to make all the decisions right now. Like you can absolutely take it, one step at a time, one cycle at a time, which I know is frustrating, but it also can give you that reassurance that you are making the right choices for your family. And it's also okay if those changes evolve over time. And I think that, one of the things that comes up often in Alexis's Facebook groups are, Alexis, what's the actual quote of what you say about like how it's the worst group, but it's actually the best group?
That's pretty much it. Like it's the best group of people for the worst possible reason.
It is. And I mean, I've had like the most incredible, meaningful friendships that have come out of that group. And I don't say that just to be, salesy about it, but it really is true. And I know that among the friends that I have cultivated these relationships with, that I would do anything for them and their family, and they would do the same for me and my family. And having that solidarity and that mutual appreciation for the hardships that we've overcome, before we knew each other and certainly during, and then also just the willingness to show up for anything that comes after that. I mean, like, that's a beautiful thing. And it sucks that we had to go through the infertility bit to get to that part, but I am still so incredibly grateful for that. And I would not trade that for anything. The thing that I would love to eliminate would be the at least statements. And I could talk all day about that, but the at least statements just really get me. I was like 26 or 27 when we started trying to get pregnant. And so I recognized that like I was on the younger side, I guess. And so oftentimes I would hear like, oh, but at least you're young. And it's true. Like I've supported families that are well into their 40s and, even into their 50s. And that's, for them. But I don't want to be doing this for my entire lifetimes too. I want the family that I want when I want it. And I'm pretty sure that most people do too. Or, the at least, that you can get pregnant, because I did get pregnant really quickly after trying. Or the at least you didn't get a chance to really know them, or at least you didn't get far past this milestone, or at least, and all of those at least statements just really dismiss the entire experience that you're going through and make you reconsider, like, should I even be complaining about this? Because I'm sure that somebody does have it quote unquote worse. And that just further isolates and depresses you. And it also highlights that people are so uncomfortable talking about these things, but then yet it goes back to the casual nature of people trying to make small talk about reproductive plans or circumstances. And it is so frustrating and very unfair that both of those things are true, that we feel this odd entitlement to know what is happening with somebody else's bodies or lives. But then we also cannot handle the discomfort for 2 seconds when somebody says that it's actually pretty hard.
Absolutely. Well, alleluia. And yeah,
100%. It's such a weird thought too, because I feel like most times when people say at least statements, they think they're trying to be helpful,
right,
and comforting. You're like, that is the most invalidating thing you could possibly say,
Like,
right
so
now.
minimizing. Yeah. And I know they are in their own way. They're trying to be hopeful for you for the future. But I wish someone would just say, like, I hate this. I'm so sorry you're going through this, and I'm holding hope for you for the future. But not like just the addition of the at least is part of what makes it so bad.
I mean, hot takes. My favorite thing to do in that situation is to make them uncomfortable. I know not everybody can do that, but it's to be like, well, do you really want to hear? Because I will make you squirm, and then they just walk away. But it's just, it's so bad. It's like, you're going to make me feel like this. Like, you're going to get it right back. So,
yeah. And it's a teachable moment when you put them in their place that I think they'll remember it and not ask again. So I feel like, it is a service for the future.
It is a teachable moment, and also it should not be, right?
No,
so,
absolutely.
I think that when you're going through it, like, how much the burden are you supposed to take on? Because it's you that's further expending energy, like mentally and physically, trying to educate them and to, be the change and all of that. And I think also for, those of us who feel really strongly to be that advocate and to, be that activist, to say this is what we want to do differently, or this is what we wish that somebody else would do for us, then we feel like, okay, like we should continue to self-sacrifice because we don't want somebody else to feel uncomfortable in the same scenario. But then it further depletes the person that's already doing what they can for themselves than for others.
Absolutely. So that's why, yeah, collectively as an organization, All Paths is trying to get the word out about these things that we don't want people to say, but also Alexis has plenty of energy to put people in their place right now. So,
I'll take it on. I'm happy. Send me in. Oh.
So before we close, is there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't ask somehow?
I think that sometimes people are wondering, like, do I really need this extra layer of support? And I would say that, while I would never pretend to know everybody's story, I will say that of the birth clients that I support, about 90% of them have gone through infertility or loss or both. And then I now have a doula agency and a perinatal wellness collaborative in Boxford. And of the families that we support as a whole, I'd say that number is somewhere between 75 and 80%. So I'd say that we've seen enough things to make some general summaries of, what we've seen, and to be able to say, this is how we anticipate we will be likely to support you as you go through this step and the next step, even though the specifics of that may shift from person to person. And I think that coming in as somebody who has both experienced infertility, but also benefited from having a doula's presence while going through infertility, it was so helpful because it really allowed me to feel all of the things that I needed to feel while also not overwhelming my partner, and to also make sure that he had support that he needed that was just different than what I could give to him. And even the vicarious trauma of him doing injections for me, or him seeing the symptoms that I was managing, or just hearing about, all of the updates of what was happening from one day to the next day and how protocol was changing, or to have to navigate, yes, we have every reason to believe that this one's going to be different than the last one, that gets exhausting, and that also can wear you down. And so to have another person in your corner who can help with the advocacy piece, but can also be that third person to just help facilitate you and your partner, if you have one, working together, I think that was one of the most profound ways that I felt really well supported during that time. And then also to have that continuity. So that way, again, like with the thought of, opening the wound of this is all of, this is everything that we had to go through to get to this point, to be able to trust somebody to explain that to other people that we needed to be in the know. That was huge for me. And I would love to believe that we are also providing that support for many families now, and to have them feel that same benefit, because it can be such a heavy lift alone. But when you have other people, such as a doula that specializes in infertility, and then also layering in the other types of really important support, like the support groups through All Paths, and then also Facebook groups that people can access at different times, then you really do feel both a sense of, broader community that is working together and has your back and has seen some of the things that you're probably encountering through your own journey, but then also that individualized, tailored support to help you with the specific context that is most relevant for your family.
You're incredible, Marissa.
You're amazing. If somebody would like to get in touch, how can they find to learn more about your work?
Sure. So we are the Lemon Grove. And so our website is www.thelemon.grove.care.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Marissa. As you said, you could talk about these things all day, and I could listen to it and talk to you about it all day. I think all three of us could. So thank you so much. We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at All Paths FB, or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support, who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a grateful shout out to our rainbow sponsor, Cryoport Systems. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.